radiomicroscopie.
Geachte mevrouw Van Kamp, welkom. Welkom ook, dames en heren, familie van de kandidaat. Ik open hierbij graag deze academische zitting, waarin Astrid van Kamp het academisch proefschrift getiteld Development of Radiomics Techniques for Contrast Enhanced Mammography in Silico Testing with Synthetic Data to Encompass Less Common Cancer Subtypes. U zult dit proefschrift in het openbaar proberen te verdedigen, maar voordat we aan de verdediging beginnen, zou ik u willen vragen om uw belangrijkste gegevens en conclusies uit uw proefschrift aan het publiek te presenteren. Gaat u aan.
Dank u. Beste prorector, beste juryleden, beste collega's, familie en vrienden, graag stel ik jullie mijn onderzoek voor over radiomics technieken voor contrast-enhanced mammografie. Laten we beginnen met een korte introductie. Borstkanker is een zeer vaak voorkomende vorm van kanker en treft ongeveer 1 op de 7 vrouwen in België en in Nederland. Het is ook de grootste oorzaak van overlijden door kanker bij vrouwen. Om deze gevallen van kanker goed te kunnen detecteren en opvolgen, bestaan er verschillende beeldvormingstechnieken. Een zeer belangrijke techniek is mammografie. Hierbij wordt de borst samengedrukt en worden daarna 2D-afbeeldingen gemaakt met behulp van röntgenstralen. Dit gebeurt typisch onder 2 verschillende hoeken voor elke borst. Maar in de borst zitten verschillende structuren. Er is vetweefsel, klieren die melk produceren en bloedvaten. En door de 2D-afbeelding worden al deze structuren op elkaar afgebeeld. Dat kan ervoor zorgen dat overlap een mogelijk verdachte lezing in de borst verdoezelt. Dit is een van de redenen waarom de nieuwe techniek contrast-enhanced mammografie, of kortweg CEM, werd ontwikkeld. In dit geval wordt eerst contrastvloeistof toegediend aan de patiënt. Deze loopt door de bloedvaten. Ook de nieuw gevormde bloedvaten dicht bij een tumor. Maar omdat deze typisch snel en ongestructureerd ontwikkelt, zullen de bloedvaten contrastvloeistof kunnen lekken in het omliggende weefsel, wat voor een hogere concentratie zorgt. Dit wordt dan gevisualiseerd door 2 beelden te maken. Enerzijds een laag energiebeeld, dat gelijkaardig is aan de conventionele mammografie en ook nog steeds geanalyseerd zal worden, en anderzijds een hoog energiebeeld. Deze beide beelden worden dan met elkaar gerecombineerd, om zo tot een beeld te komen waarin de aankleuring duidelijker weergeeft waar zich een mogelijk verdachte lesie bevindt. Een type lesie waarnaar we kijken in mammografiebeelden zijn microcalcificatieclusters. Calcificaties zijn kleine afzettingen van calcium in de borst. Zij nemen zelf geen contrastvloeistof op en zijn daarom beperkt zichtbaar in het gerecombineerde beeld. In het laag energiebeeld daarentegen, of in een gewone mammografie, waarvan u enkele voorbeelden ziet, zijn deze wel te zien als kleine witte afzettingen. Als we calcificaties hebben die kleiner zijn dan 1 millimeter, spreken we van microcalcificaties. Deze kunnen gegroepeerd voorkomen in clusters. Hoewel deze clusters zelf geen kanker zijn, kunnen ze wel een aanwijzing zijn voor een andere verdachte lesie. Die kan goedaardig of kwaadaardig zijn. Naast deze microcalcificatieclusters zijn er ook andere types lesies in de borst, bijvoorbeeld massa's. Deze lesies kunnen goedaardig of kwaadaardig zijn, invasief of niet, of veel of weinig aankleuren door contrastopname. Deze variëteit aan lesies bemoeilijkt de interpretatie van CEM-beelden, ondanks de vernieuwende techniek. Daarnaast zijn er nog andere factoren die interpretatie bemoeilijken. Er is bijvoorbeeld ook een grote variëteit aan borsten. Sommige zijn meer dens, terwijl andere meer vetweefsel bevatten. En sommige zullen ook in achtergrondweefsel contrastvloeistof opnemen en dus aankleuren. Andere mogelijke factoren zijn artefacten, een lage beeldkwaliteit, de tijdsdruk voor een radioloog om beelden te beoordelen en het toenemend aantal gevallen ten gevolge van de vergrijzende bevolking. Daarom is het idee ontstaan om de interpretatie te proberen verbeteren met tools die gebruik maken van computergesteunde diagnose. Deze analyseren het beeld en geven extra info aan de radioloog. Veel van deze tools zijn gebaseerd op een vorm van artificiële intelligentie of AI. De vorm van AI die het vaakst gebruikt wordt bij het analyseren van medische beelden zijn radiomics. Voor CEM kijken we steeds naar ons laag energiebeeld en het gerecombineerd beeld. In een eerste stap wordt een mogelijk verdachte regio aangeduid en deze wordt dan verder geanalyseerd. Van deze regio worden een heel stel waarden berekend, die rekening houden met vorm, intensiteit of textuur. Deze waarden worden handmatig bepaald en gefilterd. Vandaar de naam handcrafted radiomics. Deze waarden worden dan als input gegeven aan een zogenaamd machine learning netwerk samen met een gekende output. We trainen dit netwerk dan om de juiste output te voorspellen op basis van zijn input. Daarnaast houden we ook een deel van onze data apart, zodat we kunnen evalueren hoe goed het getrainde netwerk werkt op data die het nog niet eerder heeft gezien. In een nog meer geautomatiseerde aanpak is het niet nodig om zelf een verdachte regio aan te duiden en waarden te definiëren. In dit geval wordt een groter, oftewel dieper netwerk gebouwd dat dit volledig automatisch kan doen. Vandaar de naam Deep Learning of Deep Radiomics. Analoog trainen we het met trainingsdata en valideren we het op aparte data. Maar om zo'n Deep Radiomics netwerk te trainen, hebben we best veel data nodig. En van deze data weten we graag waar zich een verdachte lesie bevindt en welk type lesie dit is. Maar voor CM hebben we minder data beschikbaar dan voor bijvoorbeeld conventionele mammografie. Dit kan zorgen voor moeilijkheden in detectie, omdat het netwerk bijvoorbeeld een zeldzame lesie nog nooit heeft gezien tijdens een training. Andere moeilijke te detecteren lesies zijn microcalcificatieclusters die beperkt aankleuren of lesies in een dense achtergrond. Daarom is het idee ontstaan om synthetische data te creëren. Synthetische data is geheel of gedeeltelijk gebaseerd op simulaties, in tegenstelling tot reële data die volledig afkomstig is uit een ziekenhuissetting met echte patiënten. Voor deze simulaties kunnen we bijvoorbeeld een fantoom van de borst maken, een model van een tumor of de fysica van een mammografiebeeld simuleren. Zo hebben we een nieuwe methode om nieuwe synthetische beelden te genereren. Deze methode is meer automatisch, waardoor we makkelijker grote datasets kunnen genereren. En anderzijds hebben we meer controle, waardoor we makkelijker zeldzame of specifieke gevallen kunnen simuleren. Vanuit deze bevindingen komen we bij het doel van ons onderzoek. We willen radiomics-technieken toepassen en verbeteren voor CEM. En we willen synthetische data ontwikkelen om onze radiomics-netwerken te trainen. Daarvoor was mijn thesis opgedeeld in 4 grote delen, gaande van de simulatiemethodes over de radiomics-netwerken tot enkele toepassingen en limieten. In onze simulatiemethodes starten we steeds van een lesiemodel. Dit is een representatie in 2D of 3D van een mogelijk verdachte lesie. We focussen steeds op die lesies die moeilijk te detecteren zijn, zoals microcalcificatieclusters en lesies met een beperkte aankleuring. Daarna simuleren we deze lesiemodellen in bestaande patiëntenbeelden. We gebruiken beelden van patiënten bij wie geen andere verdachte lesie aanwezig was. Zo kunnen we nieuwe beelden van synthetische data genereren. Voor het simuleren van onze microcalcificatieclusters hebben we een toolbox ontwikkeld. Hiermee kunnen we verschillende vormen van calcificaties simuleren, die eventueel gelinkt zijn aan bepaalde klinische types. We kunnen ook volledige clusters simuleren. Dit kan in verschillende distributies, gaande van redelijk regelmatig op een rooster tot meer realistisch met meer verschillende vormen en groottes. We hebben ook enkele van onze gesimuleerde clusters voorgelegd aan radiologen. We vonden dat zij geen duidelijk onderscheid konden maken tussen beelden met een echte cluster en beelden met een gesimuleerde cluster. Daaruit vonden we dat we met de juiste parameters clusters kunnen simuleren die er realistisch uitzien. Maar een nadeel van de vorige methode blijft wel dat we clusters simuleren onafhankelijk van het beeld. Wanneer we de cluster dan in een bestaand beeld steken, kan dit problemen geven met de integratie met omliggende structuren. Daarom hebben we ook een methode ontwikkeld die er wel meer rekening mee houdt. In een eerste stap kijken we daarom naar een laag energiebeeld en we verdelen de borst in het beeld in een rooster. Voor elk vakje bepalen we dan een set van radiomicswaarden. Deze radiomicswaarden hebben we gekozen om regio's te vinden waarin het moeilijker zou zijn de calcificaties te detecteren, aangezien dit net het soort data is die we willen gebruiken om ons deep radiomics-netwerk te verbeteren. We kiezen dan het hoogst scorende vakje. Binnen dit vakje maken we een 2D-clustermodel, gebaseerd op waarden als intensiteit, contrast en grootte van de calcificaties. Dit clustermodel vormen we dan om naar een projectietemplate. Dit doen we door de fysica van het nemen van een mammografiebeeld te simuleren. Deze projectietemplate vermenigvuldigen we dan met de originele pixelwaarden in ons laag energiebeeld. Zo krijgen we het resultaat waarbij we de toegevoegde witte clusters in ons beeld kunnen zien. Daarnaast willen we op dezelfde locatie ook aankleuring simuleren in ons gerecombineerd beeld. Daarom kijken we eerst naar de locatie waar we de cluster hadden toegevoegd in ons laagenergiebeeld. We maken dan een masker rond alle classificaties die we in ons beeld hadden toegevoegd. Opnieuw vormen we dit masker om naar een projectietemplate waarbij we rekening houden met de aankleuringswaarde, dus de opname van contrast. Deze waarden bepalen we op basis van waarden die we gemeten hadden voor reële lesies. Opnieuw vermenigvuldigen we onze template met de originele pixelwaarde, deze keer van ons gerecombineerd beeld. In het resultaat in de rechterbovenhoek ziet u de aangekleurde lesie, de aankleuring waar we onze gesimuleerde lesie hadden gezet. Terug naar ons Deep Radiomics netwerk dan. In eerste instantie hadden we reële data beschikbaar waarmee we dit konden trainen. Bij deze data was de locatie van de lesie aangeduid door een radioloog en was het type van de lesie bepaald door een pathologisch onderzoek. Daarnaast hebben we nu een methode ontwikkeld om synthetische data te genereren. Deze kunnen we ook gebruiken om ons Deep Radiomics netwerk te trainen. En tenslotte kunnen we ook trainen met een combinatie van reële en synthetische data. Als netwerk evalueren doen we steeds op reële data van reële patiënten en reële lesies. Dit geeft een goede vergelijking. Enerzijds evalueren we voor detectie, kan het netwerk voorspellen waar zich een verdachte lesie bevindt, en anderzijds evalueren we voor klassificatie. Kan het netwerk het juiste type lesie voorspellen? Voor klassificatie kijken we naar area under the curve. Hoe hoger deze waarde, hoe beter ons netwerk kan differentiëren tussen goedaardige en kwaadaardige lesies. Op de x-as ziet u verschillende waarden van reële data waarmee het netwerk was getraind. Aangezien de curve redelijk horizontaal loopt, kunnen we concluderen dat het toevoegen van meer reële data een beperkte impact had op de klassificatie. Daarnaast geven de verschillende gekleurde curves verschillende hoeveelheden toegevoegde synthetische data weer. Aangezien deze curves grotendeels overlappen, vinden we dat ook het toevoegen van synthetische data een beperkte impact had op de klassificatie. Voor detectie kijken we naar precisie. Dit is hoeveel van de waarden voorspeld door ons netwerk ook effectief een verdachte lesie zijn. We zien dat de volle gele lijn, waarbij geen synthetische data was toegevoegd, hoger ligt dan wanneer we wel synthetische data toevoegen. Dat wil zeggen dat het toevoegen van synthetische data een negatieve impact had, aangezien ons netwerk nu meer verdachte of kwaadaardige lesies voorspelt dan er effectief zijn. Daarnaast kijken we ook naar sensitiviteit. Dit is hoeveel van de echte lesies gedetecteerd zijn door ons netwerk. We zien dat de verschillende gekleurde curves hoger liggen wanneer we meer synthetische data toevoegen. Dit toont aan dat synthetische data kan helpen om meer kwaadaardige lesies te detecteren. Meer zelfs, als we uiterst links kijken naar het punt waarbij geen reële data was gebruikt, zien we dat ons netwerk toch reële verdachte lesies kan herkennen, ook al was het getraind met enkel synthetische data. Zo hebben we de voornaamste resultaten van ons onderzoek besproken. We kunnen de impact analyseren door naar verschillende toepassingen te kijken. Ten eerste vinden we dat we mogelijk detectie en klassificatie kunnen verbeteren door het gebruik van deze getrainde Deep Radiomics netwerken. Voorlopig waren deze netwerken wel enkel getraind op beelden, maar in de toekomst zouden we nog meer informatie kunnen meenemen. Andere factoren die relevant kunnen zijn bijvoorbeeld leeftijd, voorgeschiedenis of genetische factoren. Voor de radioloog kunnen de radiomics-netwerken helpen bij een computergesteunde diagnose. Een nadeel blijft wel dat het netwerk vaak enkel een voorspelling doet en niet zozeer uitlegt waarom het deze doet. We willen in de toekomst daarom werken aan methodes die nog meer uitleggen waarom ze een voorspelling doet, zodat we deze beter kunnen interpreteren. Ook een patiënt kan gebaat zijn bij het gebruik van AI en radiomics, aangezien we misschien minder gemiste gevallen zullen hebben of minder onnodige vervolgonderzoeken. Het is wel zo dat een netwerk vaak enkel gebruikt kan worden voor de training en de validatieset waarop het getraind is. En een netwerk kan dus niet zomaar toegepast worden in een andere setting, voor een andere populatie. Daarvoor is steeds uitgebreide validatie nodig. Ook het creëren van synthetische data heeft verschillende toepassingen. Ten eerste kunnen we makkelijk grote datasets genereren. Daar hebben we hier bijvoorbeeld voordeel bij gehad voor het trainen van onze Deep Radiomics-netwerken. Anderzijds kunnen we ook virtuele klinische studies uitvoeren met simulaties, waarbij het niet meer nodig is een grote complexe studie in het ziekenhuis op te zetten. Vaak blijven de simulatiemethodes wel beperkt tot enkele modellen, zoals hier de klassificaties, of enkele systemen, zoals hier de focus op CRM. Daarom kunnen we in de toekomst misschien kijken naar nog meer innovatieve en automatische simulatiemethodes. Daarnaast kunnen we zeer specifieke gevallen genereren. Die kunnen misschien helpen bij training en analyse van artsen. De vraag blijft wel of onze synthetische data steeds realistisch genoeg is. Daarom is het altijd van belang onze volledige simulatiepipeline te valideren en niet enkel de aparte stappen en om steeds rekening te houden met de specifieke toepassing. Voor de patiënten kan het relevant zijn dat synthetische data ervoor zorgt dat we misschien minder patiëntendata nodig hebben en er bijvoorbeeld minder ethische restricties zijn. Het blijft wel vaak moeilijk om onze synthetische data zo te maken dat ze volledig representatief is voor een gehele bevolking. Daarom is het steeds belangrijk ook te kijken naar zeldzame en specifieke gevallen en deze mee te nemen, waarvoor wij in ons onderzoek al de eerste stappen hebben gezet. En zo komen we bij het einde van deze presentatie. Ik wil u graag bedanken voor jullie aandacht en geef hierbij het woord terug aan de prorector.
Dank u wel, mevrouw Van Kamp, voor deze presentatie en vooral voor de 2 samenvattende dia's op het einde. Die waren voor mij heel verhelderend. We gaan beginnen aan de oppositie, aan de verdediging van uw proefschrift. Uw promotieteam dat hier voor me zit, heeft een aantal experts uitgenodigd op de eerste plaats om uw proefschrift te beoordelen. Dat was positief en daarom staat u hier en mag u dat proefschrift verdedigen. Logischerwijs blijven er altijd vragen bij een onderzoek en daarvoor hebben we dat expertteam hier zitten en ook nog een opponent online die u zullen ondervragen, een aantal vragen hebben waarop u hopelijk op een academische manier kunt antwoorden. Oppositie begint wordt geopend door professor Heren. Hij is hoogleraar Imaging Mass Spectrometry aan deze universiteit. Gaat u gang.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidates, first off, I would like to congratulate you with this wonderful booklet in which you really are breaking boundaries. And that perspective of deep learning and deep radiomics, of course, is fantastic. Automated interpretation, better diagnostics, faster forward for patients, as you described in your wonderful presentation. It does sort of resonate with me a little bit. Well, that's great. But I also know that every hospital works differently. Every radiologist works differently. They all have different instruments. So I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on the role and the need for standardization in these type of approaches. And particularly, what does that mean for the generation of synthetic data?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for those kind words and your question. If I was to focus on the standardization of deep learning techniques or deep radiomics technique, I believe there's very much research going on into having a model which was tuned or optimized for a specific data set, also applied to different hospital settings. This could be standardized at different steps in our pipeline. I think firstly, a lot of hospitals are looking into standardizing maybe data storage or annotations and formats, which would help us in the training and the validation. Secondly, during training and optimizing our model, I think I mentioned we would always need to perform extensive validation for the hospital setting or the other setting in which we want to apply our deep radiomics model.
But do you think you could incorporate as is all the data that is generated by, let's say, all the hospitals worldwide? Because they might instrument X and instrument Y and different resolutions, which give you different features. And particularly your synthetic data, is that not dependent on how well you can resolve a feature if you include that and multiply it with the original radiograms, the mammograms, sorry?
I agree. We cannot easily just use all the data we have. There is need of quality control of the data in the first place. And then for the synthetic data generation pipeline as well, I think we have tailored our method quite extensively to the data set we had available. And therefore, I know there are limitations regarding the simulations we perform because we have always validated them for our specific data set which was available. Okay. And we would need to go to more standardized approaches for which I believe maybe deep learning-based approaches could be helpful as they can what are the measuring features in
You could perhaps use your deep learning tools to actually focus on the points or the elements in the protocol that need to be standardized, what have the most impact, perhaps. Anyway, let's move on to a different line of questioning. Thanks very much, a very clear answer, and I agree. So there's room for standardization. I would like to ask one of your paronyms to read proposition number 5.
All models are wrong, but some are useful.
Thank you very much. Well, this phrase is intended to express that all models essentially fail to grasp reality properly, right? And that made me think about the use of synthetic data. If I would make the statement, all synthetic data is wrong, but some are useful, do you think that's accurate or not? And what is your reasoning in that matter?
I agree that indeed all synthetic data is wrong, but it can be useful because we inherently are doing simulations. We are not starting from real patients. We are trying to approach the realistic settings as they are. But I know there's limitations in terms of variability. We cannot model all the potential lesions existing in a real patient group. And also what we already see, that integration with surrounding structures is difficult. So I agree, if it's all models are wrong, referring to deep learning models or statistics, or all synthetic data or simulation models are wrong. They are, because they also always rely on simulations, but they are useful for a specific approach, and therefore we would need, I think, validation of the specific task and not necessarily have a perfect model.
If there's one element you could improve on the synthetic data, what would that be? What would you address to make it even more robust and less wrong?
I think for my specific pipeline, it would be the integration with surrounding structures where we start from an image and combine it with a lesion rather than simulating a lesion inherent.
Okay, that brings me to another question. I see the prorector is already sort of itching, but okay, so I can continue. Good. So in chapter 5, one of the nice things you really demonstrate is that if you increase further differentiation in your lesions, other than malignant versus benign, your diagnostic accuracy essentially goes up. I mean, I'm sort of paraphrasing it now, what your finding is. That made me also think, well, what if there would be ways to differentiate that even further, include different conditions? And that's a little bit in line with what you were just saying. Would that be helpful? Could you, by increasing the number of classes, increase the diagnostic precision further? And what is needed to do that?
I believe there is potential to increase the diagnostic accuracy or any level of accuracy, but I believe if we would make a further classification or divide into more classes, we come at some point where we have to make a trade-off between having sufficient training data for each of our specific classes and not having very small classes. So there will be a trade-off in having the most optimal distribution of classes, but still having sufficient
but in that, like what you're saying, you need enough information to train your models, right? But what if you then also expand the type of information you put into your models? Now you're using CEM or digital mammograms. Could there be other pieces of, let's say, imaging information you could include to further that diagnostic accuracy?
We could indeed try to improve our accuracy by using multi-model data, looking at different image types being combined into the same.
And what image types would you choose then? That's exactly the answer what I was hoping for. But what imaging types would you use?
For my applications for contrast-enhanced mammography, we often are looking at images from patients who have been recalled from screening or who were at high risk. So they will quite often already have previous exams for digital mammography or maybe another MRI exam. So I would include maybe some of the previous screening
exactly. So hyperspectral data or MRI or MRSI data would be useful. Yeah. Okay. Now. I can finalize. I can continue on for but I won't. Very short question and hopefully short answer. So I'm a big fan of technological innovations, and all of these imaging instruments are getting better and better. Higher resolution all the time, faster, higher throughput. What is the impact of that increasing innovation and improvement of instrument performance on your approach? Do we need to redo your approach for every new instrument that comes out?
Are you referring to the approach of our deep learning model predictors or the synthetic?
For instance, if you
data?
have higher resolution images, what effect does that have on your predictions? Can you use your old model of the lower resolution instruments?
I think we can definitely start from this model and maybe use it as our pre-trained weights and then try to optimize and fine-tune on our novel images.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'll gladly give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you, Professor Heren. For the audience, you noticed that we switched to English. We will continue to use the English language for the opposition, but at the end we will switch again back to Dutch. The opposition will be continued by Professor Zikopoulos. He is present online. And he is a professor of advanced X-ray imaging methods at the Radboud University Medical Center in Nijmegen. Professor Zikopoulos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Prorector. Thank you very much for the invitation. Dear candidate, I also congratulate you on very nice work and congratulate the promotion team. And I hope today will be a festive day for you and your loved ones. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I still have the opportunity to ask some questions. And first, I would like to focus on chapter 3. There's a couple of figures on page 70 in which you are simulating calcifications and you ask radiologists to characterize their benign versus malignancy characteristics for real calcifications and for simulated ones. And their ability to tell between the real and simulated calcifications was not great, to be honest. So it seems like, okay, great, good for you. But when you ask them, are these malignant or are these benign? Their performance was actually different for the simulated lesions than for the real ones. So is that enough that you couldn't fool them, but their performance is actually different? Or what really matters is how do they actually do in the clinical task? And if the latter, then why ask them if they think they're simulated or not?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. We indeed performed a simulation study at the same time asking about realism and malignancy. And maybe the result we expected the least was that radiologists could better distinguish between simulated lesions and than real lesions. I think this was due to the way we simulated the benign lesions to be very round, very spherical, and therefore might have a less realistic approach. But this helped us in knowing that we could further use our synthetic data or simulations because we had made a relevant classification probably between benign and malignant. But then further on for the realism assessment, this was very interesting to know, but for training our deep learning network, we were more interested in seeing, can we improve the accuracy of our network with this synthetic data rather than having the most realistic cluster simulated.
Mm-hmm. But if your simulated lesions, if the characterization of the simulated lesions is different in terms of performance versus the real ones, is that really helpful, or are you training the deep learning model in a way that is less and less clinically realistic?
Maybe I misunderstand the question. Are you asking whether we have sufficiently proven that we have our malignancy classification, benign versus malignant, to have accurate ground truth to train our deep learning model with?
Yes, exactly. You think it is? Because I see the distribution of benign real versus benign simulated in confidence scores when you ask them to validate the level of malignancy is quite different. So even if they fool them, is this realistic or not? Is that good enough when they can tell better when the simulated lesions, when the lesions are simulated than when they're real? What is most important, their clinical performance or their level of distinguishing real from simulated?
I believe we would always need to consider the task at hand, which could, for certain examples, be that we want to simulate as realistic as possible our lesions, but for the task of training or improving our deep learning model, we are not necessarily bound by the level of realism. What our approach is having as high accuracy as possible, and maybe we don't need as realistic looking a lesion as we can, but we are interested in having a relevant ground truth that we can use for training our classification model with.
Okay. So it's more important to test them more in terms of the actual clinical task, like you said, as opposed to asking them, do you think this is real or not? That is more of a secondary question, right?
It will depend on our approach, on our specific task, yes.
Okay. It was interesting for me to hear a few minutes ago that you said all synthetic data is wrong, okay, but sometimes it's useful. As long as we're philosophizing, let's continue philosophizing. And somebody said, you can fool people, a few people for a long time, or everybody for a short time, but you can't fool everybody for forever. So I was wondering, when you were asking radiologists, is this lesion real, is this lesion simulated, did you track if their correct answers improved with number of lesions that you asked for?
This is something we did not consider throughout our study. I do have the result, but I think it would indeed be relevant to check if radiologists were training while performing the validation study. However, we also never gave them feedback. So when they scored a lesion on realism or malignancy, they didn't have a response on this was correct or not, or this was synthetic or not. So there was no, if they were training while performing the validation study, then it was just purely on their own insights.
But perhaps at some point they would have become conscious about their subconscious ability to tell benign, simulated versus real, right?
Yes, that could have been a lesion.
You can't fool them forever.
No.
Let's say. Yeah. If I have one more minute, then I jump to chapter 6.
1 minute, yes.
Yes. Okay. So I have a question on page 124. When you are now simulating the enhancement in the contrast-enhanced mammography images, you say a specific sentence says, this increase of resulting pixel values effectively simulated enhancement in the recombined image. How do you know the simulation was effective?
That is a good question. It's not something we have actually measured. We have always used this data to train our deep radiomics network and then checked or performed validation and studies based on our trained predictor. The way we validated, so to say, our enhancement simulation was by comparing a distribution of what we call enhancement values in the real data and the synthetic data, but we never looked at a single image separately, which is a good thing we could improve on.
Okay, so you validated, let's say, downstream. Okay, that's fair and interesting. Thank you very much. Then I yield the floor back to the prorector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zegopoulos. The opposition will be continued by Professor Krijns. Professor Krijns is a professor of experimental radiotherapy at the Catholic University of Leuven.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Thank you, your candidate, for your nice work and a nice presentation. As someone coming from the field of radiotherapy, I learned a lot on contrast-enhanced mammography. And I've seen throughout your work that your sensitivity of the models kept increasing. So at this stage, with the models you designed, what is the role of these models in current clinical practice? What could the role be?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. I believe if we were to enroll the currently developed deep radiomics networks, it would be where CEM is already currently used in practice in the clinic, which is most often for follow-up of patients with a suspicious lesion found in normal digital mammography or for high-risk patients. And then I believe what we trained our model to do, or what we were imagining to do was to be an aid really for radiologists, so they would have the predictions returned by the deep radiomics network maybe showing up on their screen or on the mammogram, so they could further analyze regions as being annotated as suspicious by the deep radiomics network.
Okay, and how would that look like then if you present this type of feedback?
I haven't worked on implementing it in the clinical workflow and having it used, but there would be probably an image where they show the regular the digital mammography image or no CEM image in one view, and where you could, for example, scroll to another view where you have a bounding box or an arrow pointing towards a suspicious region.
Okay. In developing the model and the evaluation, you looked at the use of synthetic data. What will be the role of the real data in future clinical trials? What role is left for real data? How much data is needed? What is your opinion?
I believe real data will have their role, I think especially in validation. If we were to test some more simulation pipelines or validate them, or also some of our developed predictive models, and if we want to know how well they perform for a real patient cohort, their real data is of course the one form of data that we know is entirely representative, so therefore real data will be relevant. And also all of the simulation and modeling pipelines we develop, we try to assess their accuracy based on measurements from our real data, so it's also very relevant in having comparisons between features extracted from real and synthetic data. So real data, I believe, will always be necessary, at least for validating if our synthetic data is relevant enough.
And at least only for validating?
Well, we also use it as part of our simulation pipeline, where we embed our lesions in the real patient data. But in other approaches, let's say the deep learning based approaches, they also train again or a diffusion model to create new synthetic data, and it's in the same way it's trained with real data, so the model learns to extract relevant features from real data, so it knows how to perform a relevant simulation.
So, yeah, I'm continuing on these trials. If you now have the models that are available, that you designed, what type of clinical trial would you propose with the developed tools? What type of clinical trial would you be needing to move forward with this technology you developed?
I believe what we would currently need to perform to assess or use our currently developed deep radiomics model would be a more extensive validation on more external data or data from different hospitals or more different settings. Maybe also on images acquired on systems by different vendors, because for now we were quite restricted in that sense. This could also show us maybe areas of improvement to show us where we are still lacking in having a good accuracy.
Okay, and would the ground truth then be coming from the types of images that you've been working on right now, or on the assessment of the radiologist? What type of ground truth would you be needing to know whether there is a lesion or not?
Ground truth is a difficult thing, because we have also, when we have a radiologist annotating the presence of a suspicious lesion, we also know there can be errors made by humans, just as there can be errors made by deep radiomics models or any radiomics model. And ground truth, I believe we can mostly trust, is the ones where we compare different annotations, maybe have multiple readers annotating them and then comparing where they agree. And then that will be our assumption for the ground truth.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers. I hand the word back to the prorector.
Thank you, Professor Krijns. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Jeukens. She is medical physicist at the Department of Radiology at the Maastricht University Medical Center. Correct.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, I also would like to congratulate you on your thesis. It's solid piece of work. It's well written, and I really enjoyed reading it. And I also would like to include your promotion team in the congratulations. You start with introduction and in chapter 2 with a nice overview of the synthetic data and what's present in current literature. And it was really nice to read how the field has progressed. And in chapter 3, you continue making the next step. So I also would like to discuss a bit about this chapter. And in chapter 3, you first describe the toolbox that you developed, this automated toolbox. And in table 3.1 and 2, you indicate what kind of settings you can make for this toolbox. And the user can choose then among these settings, and this leads to a variation of lesions that you can make, clusters. And in 3.1 and 3.2, you also indicate that there is a lot of variety. And while this flexibility is, of course, a strong aspect of the toolbox, I wonder how you then, as a user, for example, you or maybe me, if I would like to use it, know how to choose the right settings. So how would I choose the settings to get the realistic clusters that I intend to have? So my question basically is, what choices do you make and where do you base them on?
Hi, esteemed opponent. Thank you for your kind words and your question. We currently indeed included a lot of variety in tuning our clusters, and we know that some combinations or maybe some single parameters might not lead to realistic results. Therefore, we also already try to implement some examples linked to clinical types, let's say a punctate cluster. So that could be, I think, for users also a good starting point, as we have tried to already visually assess the appearance of these specific clinical based clusters, and then a user could start tuning from these combinations of parameters. Further, when we perform simulations, we look at measurements regarding size or diameter or number of calcifications in a cluster, again based on real patient data or values in literature. So that would also be another potential starting point in tuning our clusters. But I agree that it is a limitation that by choosing very random settings, we can create clusters which are completely unrealistic, also maybe not even feasible to simulate, as they are maybe too large or too small.
Yes. So so basically this also means that if, for example, I start using the toolbox, I need to validate and the clusters that I have created. I always need to take this step before I continue using the clusters that I simulated then.
You mean taking the step of tuning your optimal
once
parameters?
you've tuned with the toolbox, you created the simulated clusters, then you need to validate whether they're realistic enough for, I don't know, the task you intend to do. That's always a step you need to take then.
It will be indeed, especially if you're simulating new clusters, but you're also probably combining it with images you have at hand, which we don't have, and using different simulation frameworks. So I think always we would need to validate either the realism or the accuracy for a specific task of the complete simulation pipeline.
Yeah. Okay, and in chapter 3 you also do this validation. In figure 3.8, it was already mentioned. And you described that you take 2 times 40 cases for the 3D, 40 realistic and 40 simulated, into one view and 2 views, and you end up then with 2 times 20, if I take it correctly, because you only consider one view, and then you divide this also in benign and malignant, so you have 10 per group, if I'm correct?
Yes.
Yeah, then I understood correct. And in 2D, you have then this 2 times 20 distribution. And you validate in the end by saying, okay, I don't see any statistical significant difference between the different groups. But if your groups are not that big, then you get easily to this conclusion, because it's hard to reach statistical significance. So how do you know then that you can make this conclusion, that you have sufficient statistical power to draw this conclusion from your data?
It is indeed a good remark, and when we are performing our validation study, we are restricted by the time and the availability of our simulations and the time of the radiologist, which is the reason why we have a limited number of simulations we can show. And I agree that maybe we have too few samples to have a thorough statistical analysis, and we just had the first analysis here, and if we would continue, I think it's a good suggestion to have maybe a larger sample set to perform the same validation on and to draw more extensive statistical conclusions.
Yeah, to be more, also in particular, if you have these outliers out of, the outlier lesions, they're probably, if you have only 10, there might be one in there, or there might not, so that is then difficult. Okay. Yeah, I will also do, if I have still some time, because you use the clusters then also to train your models, and it was already a bit discussed how can you use them in clinical practice. And in your discussion, you at a certain point write that the clinical acceptance and also some skepticism among healthcare professionals need to be overcome still. So I was wondering, could you elaborate on how do you propose that your models go into clinical practice, and more important probably how to overcome this skepticism by, I guess, mostly the radiologists who have to work with it.
Can you briefly answer the question?
Well,
maybe not an easy task to do.
Maybe we, as the researchers, hope that the results of the model, they speak from themselves, that we can prove maybe that a reader utilizing some of our AI models improve their accuracy compared to not using them. And we hope that just by showing having more often used in a clinic, we can convince people.
Yeah, just basically start using it and learn that it works. Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy. Give the word back to the pro-rector.
Thank you, Dr. Jurkens. Opposition will be continued by Professor Verhagen. He is Professor of Radiation Physics and Imaging at the Maastricht University.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, I also want to congratulate you with your beautiful thesis. Besides a good thesis, I also find it a brave subject, because in the 4 years that you've been working on this, probably there was a lot of progress in deep learning, and there is not much clinical implementation yet. So yeah, these are the things that you hope to overcome, of course, with this kind of research. Maybe I would like to take you a little bit out of your comfort zone. Hope you don't mind, but I'm a physicist by training, and I was immediately in chapter 1 already very interested in new techniques like contrast-enhanced mammography. You even mentioned they are widely available. Maybe that's the first thing you could comment on. Are they really widely available, or is this more like an experimental new technique?
Currently, they are being implemented in more hospitals indeed, and there's already different vendors who have machines on the market that have contrast-enhanced mammography available in their system.
Yeah. And so then you're replacing a machine which uses one low kV spectrum with another one where there is a second also quite low kV, I guess. I couldn't find it in your thesis. Do you know approximately? So normally you have 28 kV for the low, and then you mentioned you have to be above the K edge of iodine, which is 33 kV, right? Do you know how far above that you are? No? Okay, not so important. No, I was just a bit worried about the dose, because not only are using two low energy spectra, to me that means you're going to double the dose somehow. And these people, most of them are not patients, but are members from the public, right? So you have to be really careful not to induce more tumors than you actually can cure, right? So I was just worried about that. Another application of AI could be to actually allow images to be made with lower quality, with more noise, let's say, and then you could train networks with very high quality images and very low. This could be based on simulations. It doesn't have to be all that realistic. Yeah? It's not so much about the lesions, but about the overall image quality. Is that something, I know it's not really part of your thesis, but something you've thought about, or you have an opinion about? Or?
Hi, esteemed opponent. Thank you for your question. We have thought about, instead of generating what we are currently doing is a lesion in an existing image, thought about creating new, entirely new images of synthetic data, and we always run into the limitation of generating the high resolution image, because it's quite difficult to have all the fine-grained details, and there's a lot of computational power needed. So maybe that was quite often our limitation. And I didn't really look into how we could use maybe lower resolution images, although for some types of detection or classification tasks, they could be added maybe to the data we have available. But since we also quite often focused on those small lesions, which were difficult to detect, or the small calcifications, maybe that would not have been our first approach.
Somewhere in chapter 3, more specifically table 3.3, you mentioned voxel sizes that you used as small as 0.005 millimeter. That was what was in your table. So that is 5 micron, whereas the resolution of a mammography imaging panel is not 5 micron, right? It's a lot coarser, I would say. So why was there a need to have such super resolution phantoms?
Maybe indeed we don't need the complete fine-grained detail in this well, we don't need it in this detail. The reason we always try to have as small voxel size as possible because we are working with small structures like calcifications, and if we want to model the different shape or size they can have, it's more relevant to go and look at a smaller voxel size where we can model them. Rather than using a larger voxel size where they maybe would only show up as a single voxel or only a few voxels. But I agree that maybe we will lose some of this information, some of this resolution at the stage where we then will want to embed our lesion model into our mammography image, because at that point we will have to align the voxel size or the pixel size of the mammography image and the lesion.
Yeah, I would argue it's not a criticism or anything, but that you have kind of simulated very ideal cases, and maybe the detectors of the future with super high resolution or something like that. But that's okay. There is something in Europe that is called the AI Act, and that actually gives not only guidelines, but really directives on how to implement AI in clinics. And all medical applications are ranked there as high risk. Would you agree with that, or do you think they should maybe differentiate it a little bit?
Would I agree if any medical application is high risk? I don't think they are, because some of them might not be really high risk for the patient directly, although even if we are using AI, for example, to do maybe some quality checks on our mammography system, they are relevant because we would need to have a good quality control to know we will have a good images acquired for diagnostic purposes or so for our patients. So high risk, I don't know what they exactly define with high risk or moderate risk.
Yeah, I think that's a bit too panicky, what they have right now. So yeah, like in radiotherapy, the field where I work, there is auto-contouring, which is a big AI task. But that you can always check visually and see if it's correct or not. But what you are studying, you cannot just check and say, oh, this is wrong. So we're already in a quite different category of AI applications, I think. Let me see. Yeah, I think that was also, I give the word back.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Verhagen. The opposition will then be continued and finalized by Professor van Ongeval. She's a breast radiologist and head of the Department of Interventional Radiology. Go ahead.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, congratulations with the presentation and the explanation as well. For clinical radiologists, it's not so easy to understand all, although I'm aware of all the simulation and from in the beginning, and I know this hard work. Thank you and congratulations. So, you know, contrast mammo is now widely used. We have a lot of new systems. We have a lot of upgradings of old systems. So the database is quite large. What would you do now? If you start now, what you do, your first test you will do on if I give you like from last week, like 200 cases of contrast mammo images. What would you test now from your work?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. I believe if you would mention what we have tested from our work,
yes.
I would want to, or what I would be very interested to know is how our deep radiomics network would perform on data from then another center or on a system from a different vendor, since currently we've only validated on one single center dataset or two center dataset, but from on all images acquired on systems by the same vendor. So I want to do maybe a more robust validation.
And then you need, as you told in the explanation, you need to first set up the whole chain again, that you don't have mistakes. Is that correct?
If we want to perform validation of how our radiomics model would work, and we would want to have a ground truth so we can actually test it, we would indeed need to, again, have correct annotations or results from the exams of the patient to know where there is a lesion, what type is it, so we can assess how our model performs with accurate data, indeed.
And is it necessary to do it on all the different type of machines and on the different populations, because you have Asian population, African population?
If we would want to gain trust and maybe overcome some of the skepticism, I believe it would be most relevant to validate on a comprehensive data set with as much variety as possible, with people from different backgrounds or different groups. So we would know our model is not biased towards a certain population or not biased towards a specific system.
Do you have an estimation the time it will cost to do this? Getting back to your work you did.
To gather a population data set?
No.
Or to develop,
yes.
Well, have our new. I believe with the current evolution of deep learning and radiomics, maybe there are already deep radiomics models available, or we already have one developed. So I would hope this step would go a bit faster, but acquiring data sets in the hospital setting and having qualitative annotations would again maybe take some time, a couple of months or a year, until we have data available and to have the models validated on this new data.
What do you think then is necessary in the future, that we optimize this process, or that we look for an AI will help you with this type of testing?
I think in terms of optimizing the process, maybe we could look into more standardized approaches of when a new AI model is available. How do we, what steps do we take to have it implemented in our hospital setting? What patient groups do we want to test it on? Which readers or radiologists will want to test it, how it performs, and how we can fine-tune it.
Will we ever have enough data to make a synthetic, with deep radiomics, to make a synthetic data set which we can use like for 2 or 3 years?
I believe if we make a very relevant or a very representative data set, which is maybe standardized also for all the tasks we would want to perform validation on, it could be used for a longer time, since we would have the control to tune specific parameters in the synthetic data sets, which could maybe be always a baseline for our validation.
And then I want to one of the paranymph. I give you some work still, and you can read Proposition 3.
Radiologists who use artificial intelligence will replace radiologists who don't.
Yes, as a radiologist, I need to ask something. Why, you need, for many years, we hear a lot of AI, and breast imaging is really tested a lot. Why is it not that, and also for other tests or AI, why is it not that we just use it? What do you think, why this is not just realistic in the near future?
I think the main reasons why current AI models are not maybe as much used yet as they are being discussed or researched is the skepticism, first of all, but also all the regulatory affairs or some guidelines that need to be followed. So we have all regulatory bodies to agree or ethical considerations. So I think it's the main reason why we are not currently using it. It's because it's so difficult maybe to have a medical device or AI being implemented in a hospital setting because of all the regulations on the one hand, and then the combination maybe with the skepticism or the fact that we are dealing with novel strategies which are not yet very well known by the radiologists.
Okay.
Als u wilt, mag u uw antwoord nog afmaken. Of was het dat?
Ik denk dat ik...
Dat was het. Mooi.
I'm set, thank you.
Dank u wel, professor Van Ongeval. Mevrouw Van Kamp, de gelegenheid voor het verdedigen van uw proefschrift is voorbij. De promotiecommissie zal zich nu voor beraad terugtrekken en ik verzoek u en uw gezelschap onze terugkomst en de uitslag van dit beraad in deze zaal af te wachten. Het duurde even, mevrouw Van Kamp, maar ik kan u mededelen dat de commissie hier aanwezig zich heeft beraden over de kwaliteit van uw proefschrift en de wijze waarop u dat proefschrift heeft verdedigd. En op grond van haar positief oordeel en gelet op de examens die u vroeger heeft afgelegd, heeft zij besloten u het gevraagde doctoraat toe te kennen. De hoogleraar professor Lambert is gemachtigd u op de gebruikelijke wijze met deze waardigheid te bekleden. Het woord is aan uw promotor.
Belooft u dat u altijd volgens de beginselen van wetenschappelijke integriteit te werk zult gaan, eerlijk en zorgvuldig, transparant, onafhankelijk en verantwoordelijk?
Ja, dat beloof ik.
Krachtens de bevoegdheid ons door de wet toegekend, volgens het besluit van de commissie hier tegenwoordig, verklaar ik hierbij u, Astrid van Kamp, tot dokter te bevorderen en al uw rechten te verlenen die daaraan volgens wet en gewoon zijn verbonden. Ten bewijs hiervan overhandig ik u nu de bul door rector, secretaris en de leden van de promotiecommissie ondertekend, met het groot zegel van de universiteit bevestigd. Ik geef nu het woord aan uw Leuvense promotor.
Okay, dear Dr. Van Kamp, it's always a pleasure to be one of the first to address you like this. What a joy.
Ik geloof dat de microfoon niet aanstaat.
I will speak out a bit better. Sorry.
It's on.
It's good now? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so you made it. In fact, you made it twice. You made this for the University of Maastricht, but also for KU Leuven, because this is what we call a code to tell here. So, congratulations. I was told I have 7 minutes and no PowerPoint presentation to tell something on the candidate. In Leuven, we do it with the PowerPoint. Here, we'll just do it with text. I would like to tell a little bit more on how it all started. This PhD project started with a telephone call by Professor Lambert the day before Christmas in 2019. We were in a holiday house with my family, and I just sneaked out for a moment for this phone call. And that was to see whether we could submit a KU Leuven University of Maastricht project combining his world-class expertise in radiomics and the experience we had in Leuven on modeling. I was extremely honored with this request, since we knew Philip obviously from his great work. We submitted a text January 7, 2020, and we were successful, and so the result of this project, well, ladies and gentlemen, Astrid, we have seen this here today. When this project was accomplished, we announced the vacancy on both websites of University of Maastricht and Leuven. We got around 100 candidates. And after first reading of all these applications, we selected 10 people to go a step deeper, and we asked them to solve a question. We provided some data and a question, I don't recall exactly which one, and your answer came in 2 days later with a model that worked, with good results and a very nice report. This was then followed by an interview. We saw a young lady, very shy, but obviously intelligent and well prepared, and we thought at that moment it must be possible to also make her confident and do this work with us and stay here one day, and it worked out, so that's great. Then, before it started, we asked you several things. First, we asked you whether you would accept to go for the double title with the obligations of 2 doctoral schools, and with you having to find out how to fulfill all these, because we were not going to find out for you, and you said yes. Then we asked you to start in Leuven, and then move after 2 years to Maastricht and then defend your thesis here? You said yes. We warned you that the experience in Leuven, where you started, that the experience in Leuven at that moment with EI was very limited. So you would be basically not on your own, but more or less like this. Added to this, there was the corona crisis coming. It was not making life easier, but you said yes. Near the end of the project, in fact, you could have tuned your PhD project either in the direction of improving the EI or the models. And in fact, you choose the models. You said, in fact, yes to the physics that was needed there, and not just the computer skills, which you obviously had as well. I heard a few other yeses at other times, and I would like to pick a couple of them. I recall the preparation of the SPIE conference in San Diego of February 2022. And we were at that moment around October 2021, so the poster was accepted. There was corona crisis going on, and I asked you whether you wanted to go to San Diego in February 2022 to present your work. And you said yes. And I thought, I don't let you go alone. Imagine one day that you would get the COVID in America, you would not be allowed to fly home, because that is what we were thinking. At least we will be the two of us in San Diego, so that is what we did. We arrived in LA after a hectic flight, and then instead of just giving LA, then you put your luggage on the belt and the things goes to San Diego. They said, no, that will not make it, but if you want to rush with your luggage out of this building, number 3, rush to building number 7, check in again, go through security, put your luggage there, maybe you catch the flight. You said yes, so we rushed and we made it. Then we were in San Diego one afternoon. I had not seen you in the conference hall, which on itself is not a problem, because not every session is interesting for everybody. However, you had been walking along the coastline the whole afternoon. And I was afraid. You are obviously a very attractive young woman, and the direction towards Mexico was known to be dangerous. But you had said yes to the adventure. More recently, you suggested to take part in the RWI conference in Chicago, because linked to that conference, there was going to come the special issue of medical physics, and your work could go in there. Then, if you had been at the conference, for very good reason, it also worked out. And then I learned you prolonged your stay in Chicago with just a few extra days in New York on your own. You may recall that I asked you to ensure you do not take the cheapest hotel in New York, and just be a bit careful where you were going to go for hiking. After a while, I discovered this nearly cyclic approach that goes as follows. Plan the work, do the work, report to us, send us a text, then go for a small vacation, and you would then come back, ask our input, plan your work, and so on and so on. So that is pretty effective. To these souvenirs and observations, I have also the pleasure to add a few things that the people in Maastricht told me, because it is not Laudacia just from me, it's Laudacia from 2 teams. They have seen immediately your eagerness to travel. I'm not sure I understood correctly. Did you go to St. Petersburg or just put the pictures there on your desk, dreaming of it? I don't ultimate dream, but very important, bringing chocolates from travel from Belgium to Maastricht was appreciated. So, Astrid, I'm nearly over my 7 minutes, I'm afraid, but you are a very brave woman. Also to stay here, of course. You easily deal with a lot of challenges, and the world is yours. You put your target, you listen carefully, that you have to tell, you think creatively how to do best, and then you do it. The many times you have said yes have now paid off, and I enjoyed personally every moment that you spend in my office to talk, to brainstorm, to take that on and go on, and I knew it would lead to something new and something I had also not yet learned so far. I'm still grateful for the same trip there to San Diego Old Town, where we invested 2 hours on tourism. Instead of just waiting 2 hours, losing time in the airport, you had decided we can still do this, and you had to Uber on your mobile phone, so we were in time in the airport. We have also a tradition of a personalized gift, which I don't give you here, normally we do, but I'll tell you what it is. My gift to you will symbolize this cycle of events that starts with, I hope, starting from a sound basis at home, I hope Leuven. Maastricht, also fine. I bought you a puzzle with a map of Leuven. Then I think find inspiration to do something. I found a book, hopefully interesting. Finally give you another beautiful puzzle for during the travel. And then I suggest you make it cyclic. Do it, come back to Leuven, think again, do something, back to Leuven. And then I think your future is just bright. And please be careful when you plan your hiking tours. Finally, I would like to thank everybody here who worked with us, with Astrid, at this project. We have seen the results here of helping hands and helping brains over the past 4 or 5 years. So I'm personally very happy that the result is this. And I congratulate you and wish you all the best.
Dokter Van Kamp, het is voor mij een grote eer om u namens de Universiteit van Maastricht te mogen feliciteren. Ook namens Board of Deans. Met deze zojuist behaalde graad van dokter. Ik wil ook graag het promotieteam feliciteren. En uiteraard familie, ouders, Evert, partner. En ik begrijp dat je altijd bij oma Emmy kon landen. Ik weet niet of ze er is. Maar ook gefeliciteerd. En uiteraard, en dat is ook al gedaan zojuist, iedereen die heeft samengewerkt met u. Want research doe je nooit alleen. Hè. Er zijn altijd meerdere expertises voor nodig. Dus ook die mensen zou ik willen feliciteren. En misschien zijn er een aantal aanwezig in de zaal. Als we het hebben over onze beraadslaging, die duurde wat lang, maar dat hoeft niet negatief te zijn. Ik moet zeggen dat daar redelijk wat superlatieven over de tafel gingen. Er werd ook gezegd, ja, er is nog veel ontwikkeling nodig voor de methode die u beschrijft in uw proefschrift, voordat het geheel in de kliniek kan worden geïntroduceerd. Maar u heeft er heel veel voorwerk aan gedaan, beschreven in uw proefschrift. En de commissie die uw proefschrift heeft beoordeeld was dan ook unaniem zeer positief over de kwaliteit van het proefschrift. We hebben zojuist een en ander gehoord over de uitdagingen die u tijdens uw werk bent tegengekomen. U bent daar zeer effectief mee aan de gang gegaan met het werk. En voor mij is denk ik de grootste uitdaging geweest om met 4 promotores te moeten dealen en 2 labs ook nog. Hè. Dus complimenten daarvoor. De verdediging, daar werd ook positief op gereageerd. U bent blootgesteld aan een breed palet van vragen. Maar daar heeft u heel kalm op gereageerd. En ik vond dat u hele mooie, strakke antwoorden gaf. Dus u hebt de opponenten goed gepareerd. Ik zou u voor uw toekomst veel succes willen wensen in uw carrière. Ik begrijp dat dat mogelijk in de computermodeling zal zijn. Of dat is misschien nog wachten op een sollicitatiegesprek. Ik weet niet hoe de stand van zaken nu is. Maar ik zou u in ieder geval veel succes willen wensen in de toekomst. Ik wil ook graag het technisch team bedanken voor het feit dat alles netjes verlopen is. Vooral voor wat betreft de online verbinding. En ook de pedel die hier best wel veel werk aan gehad heeft. Voordat ik de ceremonie beëindig heb ik een paar mededelingen. Ik zou het publiek willen vragen om ons voor te gaan zo meteen naar de refter, waar de receptie zal zijn. En wat wij willen doen hier in de zaal is nog heel even blijven. Ik wil professor Zikopoulos de kans geven om u te feliciteren. En daarna gaan we nog naar de trap hier in de hal. En ik zou willen vragen of Evert dan ook meegaat om een foto te maken met het hele team. En dan komen wij naar de refter en dan kunt u de jonge dokter feliciteren. Dit gezegd hebbende sluit ik deze ceremonie.